Is all of this photography stuff necessary anymore? Today we're going to be talking about CGI, 3D computer-generated images versus photography, and what that might mean for photographers going forwards. Because images like this are now becoming a reality. And what that means is CGI images are becoming easier to produce, faster to produce, more efficient, and in many ways as realistic as photography. In this live Q&A, we're going to get right down and deep into understanding the differences between the two, looking at examples, and figuring out what you need to know about the future of CGI and photography and how it might affect you. So, hi, I'm Karl Taylor. We are live on YouTube and Facebook simultaneously, I believe. And recently, I've worked on a project where I put my own photography skills as a product photographer against a CGI artist, and we worked here in my studio on the same shoots, and we did a number of comparison shoots to try to figure out exactly which one would work best, whether CGI or photography was more efficient, or whether photography was the easier, or which one was the most expensive to produce, etc., etc. And it revealed some really interesting results. And some of those things we're going to talk about today, but I'd also like to take your questions on the topic. Maybe there are many of you that have concerns about understanding 3D for the future of visual imaging production. If you're in the business as a commercial photographer, this is something that you need to be thinking about right now and going forwards, and maybe upskilling yourself in that area so that you don't get left behind. And we're going to look at some examples and see if you can figure out which ones are CGI and which ones are real world photography. And from there, we'll look at those images in detail and we'll discuss the pitfalls and advantages of each. Now, let's start off with these two images. Two images I've got on screen right now. One of them is a photograph, and one of them is a completely computer-generated image from a 3D model that was created in a 3D space, textured, colored, rendered, and then output as the final image. Can you tell which one is which? It's difficult at first glance. If we go in a little bit closer, I'm going to zoom in on the images and we're going to take a little bit of a closer look. Now, one of these is a photograph, one of them is a CGI model. Now, as I go closer and closer, you might be able to start to figure out which one is which. And the giveaways, you think, well, this one maybe looks a little bit scrappier on there, or there's a thumbprint on that one, so maybe this is the real one here, or maybe this one has got more texture on the leather strap, so maybe that's the real one, or this one looks more glossy, so that's the real one. And it is hard to tell. It kind of takes a little bit of a trained eye to figure it out when we look at the detail on the side of this watch here, or we look at the detail on the side of this watch. Which one is the real one? Which one is the photo and which one is the CGI? Well, let me tell you. Let's just zoom out and point out some of the differences. So first of all, the one on the left is CGI. That one was created by a colleague, Ethan Davis, who's a photographer and a CGI artist. And he worked here in my studio whilst I conducted the same shoot as a real world shoot. And we deliberately, in our process, set up the same camera angle, the same viewpoint and everything. And that resulted in us creating these two images that look very similar. So if you look at the images, you can see the blocks look the same, everything was the same, except in the real world, I had to actually create the blocks. I had to have the blocks made at some considerable expense. In the 3D world, they didn't have to be made at all other than in this virtual space and then textured to look like these matte acrylic blocks. The watches themselves, again, the 3D artist maybe would have had to make them, but actually these days you can buy a lot of stock 3D models. So a lot of the work can actually not involve the 3D creation, but just the texturing and the rendering afterwards. But interestingly, the end result I felt on this one, the photography was actually better. And let's take a look why. Let's zoom in. Partly this comes down to lighting. So one of the things obviously that I will happily admit is that I am a bit of an expert when it comes to lighting. And you can see my lighting around the rim and the case of this Apple Watch. I've created more rim lighting around the edge there, more gradient of lights around the edge, and revealed some really nice texture in the watch strap there as well. Now, one of the advantages I had in doing that as a photographer was I was able to see the lighting, obviously through my camera, in the studio and on my test shots, and fine-tune it and perfect it. So working in a sort of real world space and moving lights around in real time allowed me that ability to fine-tune my lighting to a greater degree. With the 3D model, Ethan has created some really nice lighting on there, but it is a little bit different to mine, and the positions of the highlights and the type of highlights look somewhat different. And it's slightly harder in some ways to identify faults with the lighting, because to get a real representation of it, you've got to complete a render. But interestingly, these days with the renders, you don't need to render the whole image. You can render just the part that you want to look at rather than waste lots of rendering time. Now, if we move on and look at some other areas, I felt these straps down here of mine worked out a little bit better than Ethan's. His weren't too bad, but I think there was something to do with the form or the lighting or the texture that made them look a little bit more believable on the ones that I produced. However, some of the disadvantages here of photography was the expense. First of all, we required the blocks to be made. We required a studio space. I needed an assistant. I needed lighting. I needed a high quality camera. I used the Hasselblad H6-100 for this. And that expense obviously is incurred compared to the 3D world, where the only expense that Ethan had was a laptop. He basically processed the image and undertook the project on his laptop. However, in real terms, the photography was actually faster on this particular project. There are some other projects we're going to look at shortly, some other comparisons. And for me, the photography was easier to achieve. It was more quickly to achieve than Ethan, who's experienced in CGI. It took him a little bit longer to do it. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages. But the point of today's exercise is to understand that this is the direction things may be going. CGI is going to get quicker and quicker. 3D modeling is going to get quicker and quicker. The software is going to get easier to use. The computers we use are getting faster and faster, so it's easier to handle. And the software, in this case it was Blender, is now actually available completely free. So there's not even any costs for the software. Many of the 3D software was many thousands of dollars in expense, so that isn't even a problem anymore. Let's have a look if we've got any questions coming in here. Yihan Lafitte on YouTube, I've just got the question someone's feeding into me here, said, I would imagine the camera not being visible in reflections has some distinct advantages in CGI. That's a very good point, Yihan, because often when I'm shooting product photography, glossy surfaces, particular camera angle. You may have a face of the product that's at the angle of incidence or angle of reflection where you can see the camera in the product. You can make the camera in the CGI world invisible. In fact, you could put a light right in front of the camera at the product and then make the light invisible to the camera. So you have actually a little bit more versatility in some ways in the CGI world, because you can make things and objects invisible to one another. So an object can do something, it can emit light, but the object itself can be made to be invisible to the camera, and various things like that. So it offers you a little bit more versatility in how and what you can do. So that's a good point. Another question on YouTube from Toby Jenkins. I've been a product photographer since 2004, and in 2020, during the first lockdown, I took to learning 3D. It is slowly becoming my go-to for image creation, and I've had 3D commissions from brands. So there you go. There's a photographer pointing out that they've started to upskill themselves in that area, and already it sounds like they're winning commissions through using 3D. And let's be clear about this, that the absolute bottom line of this, as in all business, comes down to supply and demand. We're going to see clients looking at this stuff, looking at the results that you can achieve in either, and the only thing the client is interested in is the quality of the result and the cost of the result. The client does not give one hoot, really, whether it's done as photography or whether it's done as CGI, because the consumer doesn't care either. And all they're concerned about is the result. Can it look as good as I need it to? And what will it cost us? Now, if you think about that in terms of supply and demand, then the decisions that get made by art directors and advertising agencies for this sort of stuff is going to come down to those things to do with price and the effectiveness of the result. Now, if we're able to get to this sort of level of effectiveness of results just by running some tests here in my studio, then imagine how this is going to progress in the coming months and years in terms of quality and speed. Right, next one. Question is from Choo Choo. I wonder if this was focus stacked. Very good question. Yes, my Apple Watch shot was focus stacked. It needed to be focus stacked because of that extreme depth of field across the whole plane. I could have used tilt and shift lens, and it is on a fairly flat plane on one surface there, so a tilt and shift would have made it the depth of field sufficient for me, but I wanted to do it just as standard photography as a test, and it's very easy to do focus stacking these days as well, especially with software like Helicon. You can just put them all together. The interesting comparison with the CGI one is you can have an infinite depth of field or as shallow a depth of field as you want. You can specify that in the parameters as you're creating the image. Padleology says, so you still need to know lighting, ? Well, that is a very, very good point. The reason that Ethan's image is successful is because Ethan has a good understanding of lighting. As a matter of fact, Ethan is one of our members on our platform and has learnt lighting and high-end studio lighting from our platform. And we have actually got several CGI artists that use our platform just to learn photography studio lighting, because the principles of lighting that apply in the real world, those real world physics, they also apply in the 3D environment in the CGI world. They're basically mimicked in the 3D world from the real world. So things like ray tracing, angles of incidence, angles of reflectance, all that sort of stuff, diffusion, graduation, all of those things are mimicked from the real world. So your understanding of them in the real world as a photographer gives you a huge advantage if you're stepping into CGI. So for example, if you're a novice CGI user and you have very little knowledge of photography, you will struggle with producing competent CGI renders because it comes down to lighting. And as Padiology pointed out there, that without that lighting skill, you're not going to be able to make anything look good. Because when we think about it, in all aspects of visual media production, whether it's filmmaking, stills photography, simple videos, CGI work, lighting and understanding how to light objects and compose objects is absolutely crucial to the final result. Alessandra Zugno says, how much is used CGI for video? Right, this is a good point. Let's bring up, I've got a whole bunch of talking points to do with photography, CGI and video as well here today. It's going to make some really interesting topics. Let's move on. I'm going to just get rid of these images a second and open up a couple of things for you because I found some really interesting things to talk about. The first one is, this is a friend of mine. This is Mathieu Robert. Now Mathieu is a French CGI artist and CGI animator. And that question there is, how much is CGI used for video? Well, Mathieu's job, he works in Paris and he produces stuff for television commercials and brands, but he does animated CGI, so that is CGI for video. Let's take a look at this video, just a part of it, and let's have a look at what he's done here on this Hennessy bottle. Now all of that Mathieu produced is from CGI, from 3D models, rendered, textured, etc., etc. And then as well as producing an image, the camera moves or the object moves and then they create an animation at the same time or as an extra as well. Now, the interesting thing about that is if we look at Mathieu's video there on Vimeo, he made that 7 years ago. 7 years ago, he was able to turn out that sort of quality. Let's have a look at another one here. This one is done for Johnny Walker. So you have a very realistic looking final bottle, all created as part of an animation there. And that one was made 9 years ago. Nearly a decade ago, Mathieu was able to produce animated CGI of that level of realism. And we're now a decade on from when he did that. Now imagine where we'll be in a decade from now. Now obviously I've been in the photography game for 30 odd years. In top flight product photography for probably the last 15 at least. Now, if we think about it, where will things be in 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now, maybe even 2 years from now? If you are a product photographer, a commercial or industrial photographer, then my advice is this is something that you need to be getting into now, you need to be learning now, you need to be upskilling yourself now, because this is not going to go in reverse. This is only going to go forwards. And you can see from what was achievable by Mathieu there 10 years ago almost, it gives you a real good idea. Now if we move on to the next little one that I've got here, this is also quite interesting. This little campaign here for BMW. Now many of you will know that cars have been 3D CGI renders for a long time. Car manufacturers have to create 3D models of their cars for all sorts of testing, wind design and car design requirements. So often they take those 3D models and then they drop them into a real photographic scene and then render them with the sort of hemisphere of lighting from all directions to map the reflections onto the car. And that's been done for a long time, because it's obviously quite complicated to shoot cars on location with big car rigs and big crews and everything else. So what's happened for a long time is photographers have shot the scene or the location and then they CGI a car into that scene and then map all of the reflections, etc., into the car. Now, if we look at this, you think, wow, well, this must be real because we've got the car, but we've got a model in there as well. Beautiful model, beautiful backlit, sunlit in that what looks like New York, I guess. and you've got this location that's in the scene as well, with the car and with the model. Now, what's really interesting about this, and this is by Curve Digital, who are a top CGI house. Let's actually take a look at this, because some of you might not be aware of this. This is how far CGI is going now. So this is called full CGI environment, real vision. And there you have it. So that image, or those images that you just saw, the whole scene, apart from the model, was actually created in CGI. That isn't a city in the background. That is not a car on a rooftop in a city in the background. That is all CGI, the location as well. The only thing that's real in the shot is the model. But I could have shot that model in my studio to match the lighting that they were going to create for the CGI scene. And then, as you can see, the model has been dropped into the final shot, so some post-production work as well. But that's how far things are moving along now in filmmaking, CGI, and photography. And it's this sort of assimilation of all of these different skill sets that are coming together now, that mean we're no longer going to be stills photographers or video makers or CGI artists. We are going to be visual multimedia artists, and we're going to need skill sets in all of these different genres for success in the future. And these are the things that I wanted to talk about today for us to debate and have a look at. We'll take some more questions in a second, but let me just want to have a look at another one here. This is by Ink, or they're called We Are Ink. This is another top UK retouching and CGI house. So what we have here is some images, and these are all CGI images of this particular model of car. But in this one, the actual location shots are real. And this is quite common in car photography, where they will shoot the location and then they drop the car in as a CGI model into the scene. So that's been common for a long, long time. But what we're now seeing is more product photography coming into the CGI realm. So we're starting to see more images of brands and product things that are being created entirely in 3D. Right, let's take some questions. Nastran Mine says, what is your advice to a new photographer about learning CGI simultaneously? Well, my advice is exactly as you say there, Nastran, and that is to learn it. We obviously have just developed this whole new part of our education platform dedicated to CGI, where people can learn the basics from very beginner right through to advanced level on our platform. But there are other resources as well. There are plenty of places you can get more information on CGI via YouTube, via different places, via some of the software itself. But if you like to learn from us because you like the way we teach and the way we get everything across step by step, nice, clear, methodical points, then we have now got a brand new 3D CGI section on Karl Taylor Education. Ray Palacio says, how about mixing both CGI and photography? Well, as I pointed out, as we just saw on screen there, that's exactly what's happening here, and that is happening a lot. For example, Ethan and I worked on one image, which was a bottle of Chivas Regal whiskey, and Ethan built me a whole cellar, a vat with all the, all the barrels and the vats and everything, and then he created a scene for me, and I shot the bottle, and then he put my bottle into his 3D CGI scene. So yes, that is going to happen more and more. Aquilino Paparo says, didn't you use the tilt and shift adapter on the Apple Watch shot? No, as explained, I didn't in that instance. I used the focus stacking method just because simply in the 3D version that Ethan was doing, he was not using a tilt and shift lens equivalent in his because he could set infinite depth of field. So I thought I would do my infinite depth of field via focus stacking. Sean Anderson says, can you give an actual time comparison? How long did the watch CGI take to create versus the photo? Well, that's a good question. And we're going to move on to that topic a little bit more now as well. So let me just open up a couple more images because I've got two more comparisons here. Actually, before we move on, look, there is an interesting view of the model, if you like, just in a flat form before it's textured and rendered and color and surface materials applied. There's just the physical model from Ethan's 3D work there. Right, we're going to open up two images. Now, these aren't exactly the same because we gave ourselves a little bit of creative freedom. We gave ourselves a loose idea of what we wanted to create, but let ourselves just go our own directions on this. So we'll see the differences. Not that one. We'll get rid of that one. Right, so we have two images here, that one and that one. Now, which one is the photograph? And which one is the CGI? Well, let's take a look. So the one on the left here is CGI, and the one on the right is the photograph. Now let's go and take a look at the photograph. This was extremely complicated to produce as a photograph. Not so much from a lighting. I'm used to lighting products like this and getting the lighting how I want it to look. But it was extremely complicated from the point of view of having to have all of these little shards of acrylic cut and then glue them in position very, very specifically and get my product in there as well and get it lit to create that final result. I think I've got a behind the scenes shot somewhere of that. Yeah, there we are. So there I am fiddling around just at the early stages with the acrylic to try and capture my shot there. And Ethan is actually working over in the corner in the back of my studio, just doing it on his laptop. And if we take a look at Ethan's result, it's a little bit different. He went for a slightly different version with also a little bit of mirrored glass in there on his shot as well. But you can see a very credible result on Ethan's CGI version. And again, keep in mind that he didn't have to worry about positioning or gluing or bracing the product and getting it to stay in position or have to concern himself about accidentally knocking anything or anything like that. So the person that asked that question, in this instance, Ethan was far, far quicker because for him to create those shards of glass was a piece of cake, just a few minutes job of specifying a triangle shape and a thickness and making it transparent. Mine was immensely longer because one, I had to get all the acrylic cut, order the right colored acrylic from my supplier, work out my triangle sizes and scales and everything, and that took loads of planning in the first place. And then I had to pay for all those materials, get them, then I had to spend hours gluing them and repositioning and figuring out how I wanted them to go. Then I had to figure out how to get my product in there and how I was going to be able to light it. So the Fahrenheit shoot was actually more complicated than the CGI. In the instance of the Apple Watches, I was actually able to produce my lighting and my final shot more quickly than Ethan's. Because if Ethan had to build the watches from scratch, they were more complicated. So therefore, modeling them would have been more of an issue. But the difference, though, with that is that you don't actually have to build all of these 3D models from scratch. As an example, let's take a look here. Let me just move these out of the way. I did this shot here, and I still believe firmly that this shot would have been very hard for a CGI artist to reproduce to this quality. So this was shot live on Karl Taylor Education. I managed to produce this photograph in about 2 hours on a live show. And then I purchased an Adobe stock shot. And then in the second live show, I put the photograph, which was the cognac and the glass and the bottle, onto the background. So everything in the shot, the reflection is real, the bottle is real, everything is real. All of the lighting that you see on my product there is all real. And the realism is obviously appreciated even further when we go in and we see, oh, look, there's some tiny specks of dust or little imperfections in the texture on the glass, etc., etc. That's what makes these things look real and believable, as well as all the little refractions and little caustics of light, etc. And then I deliberately put these highlights and flare on the edge of the bottle with an additional spotlight. Now, all of that was shot live on one of our shows on Karl Taylor Education, and I did it in under 2 hours. And that's because I know how to light it and I knew how I wanted it to look. Would a CGI artist have been able to do that in that time? I don't think so, and I don't think they would have got to the same result. And then the argument is, well, they would have also potentially had to build the model. And if you look at the complexity of that particular bottle with all the sort of petals and the divots, if you like, in the glass, you think about the shape of that, that would also take time. However, let me just show you this as a comparison as well. If we just jump back to my web browser, I did a quick search online, and here is a 3D model of the same bottle, quite a highly detailed one, and that one is available on TurboSquid for $25 US. So this is one of the interesting things now with the 3D world, is that as photographers or working for brands and products, often they can supply you the 3D model ready built. They can supply you the artwork that goes on the label or the logo design, etc. Or you can find the models on 3D stock libraries, basically, where you can purchase these models at quite low prices. So a lot of the complicated, time-consuming model building stuff has already been completed by someone else that you can benefit from. And then really, as the 3D artist, as the photographer trying to do these new skill sets, it's all about texturing, lighting, and rendering and creating the final output. And that's, again, where we go back to someone's earlier question. We look at those lighting skills that are really, really important in order to get that to the level needed. And that's where, here actually is the shoot on our platform. This is me working on the shoot live. And that's where you can learn these lighting skills, obviously, is on our platform. And as I say, many CG artists use our platform to learn lighting skills as well. Now, of course, we also now have added this massive new 3D CGI section on our platform where you learn all the basic terminology of CGI, all of these beginner lessons to get you started with the very basics of modeling, rendering, and then you can see all of these shoots. And every single one of these shoots where we did comparisons, you also get the full tutorial on how to do the 3D version, as well as seeing the photo shoot and the lighting as well. So there's loads going on there. Let's take some more questions. Dang Fat Nguyen, I think, says, can CGI beat photography? Is it worth more than photography? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. Can CGI beat photography? I think we could say it can match photography, or it's getting very close to it. And certainly anyone who says it can't may be correct right now, but whether that's still correct in 6 months or a year or 2 years from now is another thing. There are images I've seen created by CGI artists that are indiscernible from photographs. Even now, as we saw on the one that I showed earlier with the Apple Watch, they're deliberately putting things like fingerprints or dust and things back into the CGI one to actually make it look more realistic. So they're deliberately introducing artificial imperfections to actually give it more realism. So we are getting this parity now where the two are getting very, very close. The question is, which one is going to be the most cost effective to produce? Now, I think I should be clear here about the type of photography. We've seen CGI advance with car photography already in the last decade. We're now seeing more inroads into product photography. But really, it's only on fixed objects. Things like this phone, for example. Here's a good example. Ethan actually did a model there of a CGI and 3D render of an iPhone, and you can see how beautiful that looks, how well he's lit it. Ethan's got great lighting skills. He's learnt lighting skills as well from our platform. He's a photographer, and he's able to deliver that beautiful lighting on that looks like an Apple advert. So, you know, there is almost an answer for you. Some objects like that would be very easy to model and very easy to render if you understand how to light them. And the question would be is, can that be more efficient than photography? And yes, sometimes it can. So we go back to that whole supply and demand thing with the client, and which one is the client going to opt for? Well, the client is only going to opt for the one that looks the best, is the best price, and as long as the consumers that view it are happy with it and are convinced by it, that's what's going to make the decision. Indrashjit Pandal says, it all boils down to creativity. Tools change with time. Do you think this will lead to photographic camera usage, a niche in the next 10 years in product photography? Well, that's a good point, and they've mentioned product photography, and that's what I wanted to lead on to. This, and what we're talking about today, relates primarily to product photography, because product items are solid, simple form shapes in many ways. They are not like human skin. They're not like human hair or pets or cats and dogs and people or food even, or organic elements. They're not like that. They are much easier to create renders of that are believable than some of the other things that I've just mentioned. So I don't think we're going to see CGI impacting on fashion and beauty photography to any real degree soon. I don't think we're going to see it impact on clothes, fabrics, textiles for fashion at all either. Food photography, probably not either. We are seeing it make an impact on interiors and architectural stuff. So another great example is that many interior companies like IKEA, nearly all of their productions are now CGI renders. Everything you see in their catalogues of their furniture and their kitchens and all of that stuff, it's all CGI renders. Another great example of CGI usage would be in jewellery photography. And if we go to Rolex, let's just take a look. Everything that you see from Rolex these days is all CGI. They don't do photography anymore. Everything that Rolex produce is a CGI image of their products, because they have to model their products from a design point of view anyway, and then they CGI everything. Not only do they CGI it, they also CGI animations, so they can create things that look like the product in motion as well. That would be far more difficult to achieve if it was a real video, but in the CGI world, it's easier to produce. So things like jewelry and other products and cars, etc., all of that is where we're going to see this big threat to product photographers. Another great example is, I mean, here we are. This is a 3D rendering service for people that want to render out jewelry. So there you go. Those rings there are created in 3D CGI and rendered out. So a lot more jewelry and fiddly work is going out now to CGI and 3D stuff as well. So yeah, those are the things where we're going to see the threats. Mike Constable says, to get a bottle or product model that doesn't exist, do you think the LiRAD scanner on an iPad or iPhone would work to render a model for CGI? I don't know if it would work that well, but certainly that technique is used. Already CGI artists have laser scanners or scanners that will scan an object and rotate it and scan it and create a model from that. So that technology is already there. Alessandra Zugno says, I wonder if also food can be CGI'd. I mean, if it's legal. Well, I don't know if it's legal or not. I'm not going to get into that argument. But I think organic items are some way off. I mean, you can create good, realistic renders of food, but I still don't think it's as efficient and as believable. So for me, still, it's more product photographers concern. Mike Gibson says, I wonder the time scale of CGI at the moment. For example, we can comfortably shoot between 3 and 6 decent product shots in a day. How many CGI shots or in the same standard could be created in that time? Well, that's a good question, Mike. And I think this is something that I found interesting learning from working with Ethan here and on the new classes on our platform, is that actually in some instances photography was quicker and in other instances CGI was quicker. And it comes down to part of the things to do with sometimes for a lot of really good stills photography, you need to build a set, or you need props made, or you need other elements to make the photograph work really, really well for an advertising campaign. So what we're seeing now is this merger, where sometimes some of the elements of the scene, the background of the scene or the set, can be created in CGI far more quickly and cost effectively, and then the product is then still photographed and then dropped into it. So I think we're going to see this fusion between the two, and it's only the photographers that are able to understand that process and learn a little bit about the both. And if we take a look back here at our 3D section, as a matter of fact, you can see this one here with the Chivas Regal. I shot that bottle, but Ethan created the scene for the bottle to sit in that shot. So things like that, where we're going to see this fusion between the two, is an area where photographers can think of the benefits and efficiencies. And what I'm trying to get at here is, obviously I'm a product photographer of nearly 30 years, and I've been shooting products for some top brands in my career, and this has always been on the back of my mind about CGI. But it's not something that I'm scared of. It's something that I think we should embrace as a new technology. We should think about learning it, and we should think about how we can harness it. Because those of us that decide to bury our head in the sand and pretend it's not a threat and pretend it's not going to hurt us, those are the ones that are going to get caught out in 18 months, 24 months from now, because they haven't started to upskill themselves in this area. So if you're willing to embrace it, now that the computer power of your laptop, your MacBook, is powerful enough to create these renders in a minimal time span, it's able to run the software in real time. We now have software like Blender, and we used Blender for all of our classes here, by the way. So all of the instruction on all of our new classes here was all done using Blender, and we decided to use Blender because it's free software. So we felt that if people wanted to learn CGI, why not let them learn with the free software rather than putting them through an expensive license with 3D Studio Max or Cinema 4D, etc., etc. So everything that I've shown you so far, all been done in free software called Blender on a laptop. So if you're willing to embrace that and take on some time, dedicate an hour or two a week to a little bit of learning, I think those photographers are the ones that are going to be still standing in 18 months, 24 months from now, because they would have understood how they can start to fuse these two visual services together. And that's, I think, what's really important. And how we move forwards with that is going to be absolutely critical. Right, Gideon says, hi Karl, should we see this as a threat or an advantage to produce the quality work as an artist? I think I just answered that. I think we can see it as an advantage if we're willing to embrace it. Soul Fellow says, I feel it a bit daunting. Are these new classes accessible for nervous beginners? Well, yes, they're absolutely accessible. I mean, without banging our own trumpet about how brilliant Karl Taylor Education is as a platform, we'll let everyone else do that, but without banging our trumpet about it, we made these classes for people that don't have a clue about CGI. One of the most scary things about CGI for me has always been the terminology. So what I deliberately did with Ethan was design a whole set of classes that are just short, simple classes that cover the terminology, like ambient occlusion, baking, caustics, bump maps, all of these little things. All these glossary of terms that CGI artists throw at you in a tutorial, and you're like, what is he talking about? We cover all those as separate tutorials, separate classes, as a big library that you can refer to any time before Ethan even steps into teaching you 3D. And then he steps into teaching it to you in a very methodical, simple, step-by-step way. And the great thing about it is that Ethan is also a photographer, so he knows what photographers need to know. We have a question here from Angela Kiraku. As a photographer and recently a CGI artist, how can I move my clients towards CGI, explaining them the advantages? Well, I don't think it's really how you can move them towards it. It's a question of showing your clients what is the most efficient. It goes back to what I said before. The client isn't going to move in any one direction or the other than to do with results and cost. That's really it. So if your results and your costs of your CGI outperform your photography, that's what's going to influence the client. Margaret Kervitz says, should you start with learning 3D before CGI? Well, I think they're one and the same. I don't think you can really step into one or the other. And that's basically what we do here. Raw24 says, I've used lots of other CG software, but haven't really jumped into Blender yet. Would be much better for my bottom line. Do the new courses cover more advanced methods too? Yes, they do. And they go into more advanced level stuff, and we're also going to be producing many more classes going forwards. But we know that as photographers and as a photography education platform, we're going to keep pushing out amazing product photography, fashion, beauty, all the different genres, as well as post-production, Photoshop, etc. But we knew we had to grasp and get hold of this 3D CGI for photographers of tomorrow. And we've only just started, and even though we've produced this comprehensive section already, that's going to keep moving forwards. Losigio Imaging says, I'm also slowly moving over to CGI. One thing that I don't think has been mentioned is the versatility of CGI. Let's say you shoot an ad with a product, but 3 to 4 months down the line, your client wants to do a new ad using the same product. Well, in a photographer, you would probably have to do the shoot all over again and set it all up. But with CGI, you can just modify the props, camera, and lightings within the project that you originally worked on, making for a quicker redo and faster turnaround time. That is a very good point, Lusigio. There you go. We can't make it clearer than that. That is a great point. Project 31 says, what price for CGI and photo? Well, that is covered on our platform. We do these heads-off shoots, and I've already explained the time scales involved. Pricing comes down to you. One thing to consider, let's just go back to the wide shot then. One thing to consider is how much does all of this cost? What is all of this space and studio and lighting and cameras and everything cost to operate day to day if you're just a product photographer? Fortunately, I'm not just a product photographer, but if I was, and I was able to operate from my dining table with just a laptop, for example, and 3D software, then obviously there are going to be cost differences. It's going to become harder and harder for studio photographers to compete because of the overheads. So that is worth considering. Toby Jenkins says, what we have to remember is that a CGI model only needs to be built once. Once it's built, it can be reused over and over, saving time in future. Yep, that was kind of covered a little bit earlier, but yeah, good point. James G, the hands-on aspect of photography for the photographer is miles more appealing as work compared to spending the entire time in front of a PC rendering, in my humble opinion. And James, I would agree with you. As a photographer of 30 years who really enjoys lighting and really enjoys producing images, I'd agree. It's the craft of doing it in real world that I really enjoy. But we have to get to grips with reality here. The fact is that CGI isn't going to go away. It's only going to move forwards. And when we talk about business and commercialization, it comes down to that supply and demand, cost versus effectiveness. That's all the client cares about. They don't care whether the artist had to sit in front of their computer or work in a studio. They only care about the result and the price. So it may be something, that is something we have to consider. Obviously, there are many other genres of photography that are not going to be affected by this. okay? We're talking product photography, jewelry, products, cars, things that we've discussed already here. We're not really getting into the realms of other genres of photography yet, so it's not all doom and gloom. And I actually still believe firmly that we will still see a strong requirement for still some product photography, but we may see a lot of it starting to be mixed a little bit with CGI. And also, there, as some of the examples that we've shown, some of the results are not always as pleasing. Let me show you another one. For example, I showed you this one. I don't think a CGI artist wouldn't have been able to deliver that as quickly as I delivered. I delivered that shot in just a couple of hours, and then another hour or two of retouching, which we shot live on Karl Taylor Education. But a CGI artist wouldn't have been able to deliver that unless they had a really comprehensive understanding of lighting. They knew how they were going to light it and get exactly the same result. So I think photography's still got a lot to offer, but I think some product photography will go to CGI, and we'll also see some merging together as well. Right, let's look at this as a good example. So we've got these two Sauvage Dior shots. One of these is CGI, and one of them is photography. And I think it's actually easier to tell in this case which one is which. Let me just get rid of that Fahrenheit one. This one is CGI, and this one is photography. And it was actually a lot harder for me to produce this than it was for Ethan to do it as CGI. And that is even with Ethan having liquid in there. Look at Ethan's liquid on that CGI. Looks very believable, and he was able to set the parameter scale of the ripples of the liquid to look more like an ocean, because you can change those parameters in that virtual world in a way that I can't in the studio. So I had to use real water and try to simulate my ripples as best I could to create more ocean sort of look ripples, but I couldn't quite get it the same. And then the difficulties associated with shooting so low, having to set up a tray of water, trying to make the product look imposing to get my lighting right, and then obviously the details of the label not being as crisp as a CGI version meant that, in many ways, I think Ethan was able to deliver a better image than I was in a still in that instance. But in another example, I think it went the other way. And if we take a look at this one, we have two Targ watch shots. Let me just get rid of that in the background as well. So we have this Targ watch shot here, a Carrera, and then we have this one here as well. And I think it's quite obvious in this particular example that this one is the CGI one and this one is the real world one. Let me just see if I can arrange these windows, arrange two up vertically, and we'll get, so let's put them side by side, have a look at those, see what you think. And they're not quite exactly the same model watch, but I think it's obvious that the one on the left is the real world photography. There are giveaway things. Look at the texture of there. It doesn't look quite as believable. The texture and the real world textures in the watch don't look quite as believable on the one on the right compared to the one on the left. And this is actually a jewelry, which, saying jewelry is actually something that is modeled out in CGI quite regularly. So sometimes we can see the photography looks better. And again, I was able to produce that watch shot in under an hour, maybe an hour and a half in real world. That took a long time for Ethan to create that in CGI and get all his reflections and his metals and his textures working. So, there is still a demand, obviously, for photography. I'm just trying to make us aware of where it's at now and where it's likely to go. Ray Palacio says, can we get a beginner's CGI course at a good price for participating in your live? It's already at an incredible price of $19 per month, not only for our CGI section, which is included, but every other section on the website, fashion, beauty, product, lighting, post-production, all of it is $19 per month. You get the whole lot. Can you get a better price than that? No way on your money, son. Right, next one. Dang Fat Nguyen, can we collaborate photography and CGI? Yes, we've already spoke about that. Soul Fellow, if the industry goes full CGI, isn't a backlash inevitable eventually? I can imagine traditional photography gaining fresh cultural cash, much more like vinyl records in the age of streaming. I don't see that at all, because you're not thinking of it from a commercial perspective. The clients aren't going to be the backlash, and I don't think the public care. Only photographers who are into photography care about the process. If you take, for example, this whole thing like you just said about vinyl records, or those photographers that use film and think it's cool, like the hipsters of today. I used film for longer than the hipsters of today, because I was shooting film from 1989, 1990, professionally all the way through to 2005. Kodachrome, Ektachrome, Fujichrome, transparency film with a light meter, on location, all sorts of various scenarios when I was a photojournalist, product photographer, whatever, using film in all different formats. I stopped using film in 2005 when I switched to digital, and none of my clients gave a monkeys. They just wanted the efficiency of digital and the efficiency of it being quicker, faster, delivered to them at a better, affordable price. And that's all that matters to clients. There isn't anyone outside of photography that gives a hoot about whether you're shooting on film or whether you're shooting on digital. And the same will apply to photography. The world isn't driven by the public perception of whether or not it's a sort of vinyl record or film thing, because that's just a little tiny niche of the users that operate in that sphere, that use the stuff, that care about it. Everyone else wandering down the high street, going about their business, that aren't interested in photography or aren't interested in vinyl records or this, that, and the other, they don't care at all. They just look at stuff and absorb it. So I don't agree with that comment. MC Krazer, do you think footwear and fashion photography will go down the CGI route, or will it remain traditional, or will it merge? I think it's probably already merged a little bit, and there may be some CGI stuff already existing in some of the footwear stuff, especially like some of the animated stuff. But I think a lot of textural and fabric material stuff still has a benefit and advantage in real world photography. Nastran Monet says, what's made you notice CGI and embrace it? Well, nothing really, other than I'm in the industry of creating product photography for clients, and I still shoot product photography as photography. I'm just aware of CGI and its impact that it's starting to make, and I wanted to make sure that we were ahead of the curve, and our platform for you was ahead of the curve, so that you can make the right decisions going forwards. Charles Matt, Karl, do you recommend going to film photography school before diving in professionally in the digital creative industry? It's an advantage in some ways. I mean, certainly my grounding in film and learning about creating images without being able to see them, because that was the difference with film, is you couldn't see the image. You were relying on understanding exposure, understanding time, apertures, lenses, focal lengths, lighting, and having to really think about it in your head because you couldn't see the image. But learning photography is far easier as a digital format, because you can see the image, preview the image, and in many ways that can help you understand what effect each light's doing, and you're seeing it in real time. So no, I don't say it's essential. I think just doing something is the best thing for learning, especially using our platform. Fanet Rickert says, any plans for teaching CGI for video? Yes, definitely. You've seen we've got CGI already for stills. CGI and advanced CGI for video will be something that we deliver in the future. For learning CGI, is there any prerequisite? No, only a computer and time. Michael Kropchek says, how would you attempt pricing your work for CGI? Would you lower your day rate since you don't use your high-end camera equipment? Wouldn't you compete on yourself with offering both CGI and photo? I don't think I would lower my day rate at this point in time, because at the end of the day, the client is used to paying a certain amount for a certain level of service and a certain standard. So if you believe you can deliver that standard and your standard is above other people, then no, I wouldn't. And an interesting example of that is when I switched from film to digital, it was actually far less expensive for me to produce digital images, because back in the days when I was shooting film, I was spending probably 20,000 a year on film and processing. And then all of a sudden those costs were gone. Yes, I had an expensive Hasselblad, my H1 my first digital camera, but those costs were gained back again just within 1 year. But I didn't reduce my prices for my clients. I actually increased my prices so they matched what they were before with the included material costs. The client didn't seem to mind. So yeah, I think we'll probably be able to compete with where we are at the moment, but who knows how long that will last, you know. Will we start to see other people pop up that don't do photography but have learnt photography lighting skills? This is one of the important points to that argument on pricing, is you're not paying just for someone to sit at a computer and have the software or have a camera or have a light. I could go and get an inexperienced photographer and bring them into the studio and say, there you go, it's all yours, off you go, shoot what you like, shoot for my clients, do the lot. They would make a complete mess of it regardless of what kit I gave them, what space or anything, because it's knowledge that is the power. It's knowledge that defines the output result. It's the knowledge you have of lighting, composition, the aesthetics, everything that goes with that. That's what your client is paying for in most cases, is what you're able to deliver. Now, if someone steps into the CGI world as a complete newbie and they think, oh, I'm going to compete with all these expensive product photographers, I don't think that's a realistic statement, because they haven't learned lighting, they haven't learned about optics, lenses, composition, aesthetics. There's lots and lots of associated facets to do with image production that is far more expansive than just the tools that we use and the way we produce the images. It's all to do with this experience and knowledge, and I think that has to be accounted for in the budget and the fees that we charge. How easy is it to make slight variations to CGI images? It's relatively easy, actually. Margit Kurvitz, if I sign up in your school, can I jump straight into CGI courses that you made? Yes, you can, Margit. You could sign up right now and you could jump into those courses straight away, as well as our other 700 classes on lighting and photography and post-production. Jane Photography, how does Adobe Dimension stack up to Blender? Just realised it's available in my plan with Adobe. From what I've heard from Ethan and another CGI artist that actually works here with us, it doesn't stack up at the moment. Warren Riley, hi Karl, do you think we could still charge the same kind of usage for image rights for CGI generated work? Well, I think I just answered that with my latest big rant about it's knowledge that the clients are paying for. This is something I really want to push home here, because this came up, I think, on our Facebook group as well, is that we had some people going, oh, Blender's not worth 2 pinches of salt, I use Cinema 4D, or I use 3D Studio Max, or it's like the whole debate of I use a Canon or a Nikon or a Hasselblad or this, that and the other. It's all a load of nonsense, all of it, because no one gives a monkey's. The only thing the client is concerned about is the result. The result and the cost of the result. Okay, that is capitalism. That's what capitalistic enterprises, that's what they're driven on. They're driven on results and price of those results and what the profit margin is going to be. They don't care how it's produced. When my clients come in here and they don't come in and go, oh, I see you've got the latest Broncolor Scoro pack there. Oh, why are you using Model 2 instead of the latest model? Or is that a Hasselblad H650 megapixel? And they don't even know what it is. They don't really care. They just know that I'm known for delivering high-end results, that the results I deliver are better than the next man, and the day they're not, they'll use the next man. So it comes down to knowledge. It comes down to what you can turn out. We mustn't get obsessed with the media or the form or the software or the tools that do the job. We must get obsessed with the results that we can produce. And in anything we do, anything, the results we can produce come down to tenacity, passion, knowledge, skill, willingness. All of those factors, knowledge, obviously, those are the things that make the difference. Danny Seaton says, well, this is a kick in the what's it. I've just finished building my studio for product photography. Cheers, Karl. Well, I don't think that's a problem for you, Danny. Your studio for product photography is still going to be relevant for some time. And if you watch the rest of this broadcast, you'll see some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, where I think we're going to see more of a fusion between photography and CGI. What I'm pointing out here to new photographers like yourself is don't get left behind on the CGI bandwagon. That's all I'm saying, because you could get stung in the future. Don't think you're going to get stung right now, but you may benefit from having both types of production coming out of your studio. Ahmad says, I wonder how long CGI has been there. I heard about it like 1.5 years ago, just asking. It's been around for a long time. I mean, I showed earlier in the show my friend Matteo Roberts, who's a CGI artist and animates CGI, producing this amazing stuff for Hennessy and Johnny Walker. He was producing that 10 years ago, and it's been around longer than that. Vladimir Ladev says, if you're a CGI artist, would you recommend going through photography education and tutorials? Absolutely. That is absolutely imperative, and I pointed that out. It's about knowledge. We've got top CGI artists using our photography education platform to understand lighting better and how to light products and the techniques and the skills needed for that, so that they can take those lighting skills and reapply them in the virtual world. That's a fact. Right, we're nearly out of time here. Let's just see, a couple more questions left there. Jason 3, hi Karl, I know Macs are better at 3D modeling and rendering. Well, actually, I may argue with you on that. He says, however, I'm a PC user. What type of specs should you have for a PC user? Well, actually, I think as you look into it, you'll find that many CGI artists actually prefer PCs and custom building PCs with their own graphics cards and processors to a really high spec. So they're super powerful for 3D and CGI. And a lot of the main software for 3D is all built around PC design stuff. More recently though, with some of the latest MacBook Pros that have really ramped up the power, the software works equally well on that. So don't discount it if you're a PC user. I think you'll find you'll be pleasantly surprised. Okay, last question we've got here. James Godby, should we be concerned about AI generated images? I don't think so, James. When we take an image of a product, there is a lot to consider in terms of the aesthetics, the important features, what the client is trying to sell, what the client is trying to show, what angle looks best. There's a lot to do with the science of human visual perception, color theory, many aspects that go into building a really effective image, whether it's in stills photography, video, or CGI. And I think that is well outside the realms of AI to interpret at this stage. Right, that's all the questions. I want to thank everyone for participating in this little debate today. And I hope that you found those comparison examples interesting and certainly give you food for thought. We gave some really interesting examples as well from some other companies in there. So if you missed that earlier in the show, go back and check this out. But if you are interested in getting yourself upskilled, learning some of this stuff. Karl Taylor Education, we've got it all here now. CGI, brand new CGI platform, everything from the basics to advanced, and we're going to continue to expand this section. That comes for $19 per month with everything else on our platform as well. All our live shows, classes, all of our photography and lighting training, all of it, as well as the CGI, is $19 per month. So get yourself over there, don't delay, start upskilling yourself so that you are making more money in the future and remain competitive. Thanks very much for joining me.